Welcome to Believing the Real, a series of talks on the theology of the real. In this episode, episode 9 of our discussion of the theology of the real, Evotrust, we will focus on the rise of science, how we came to accept doubt rather than certainty as the foundation of all knowledge. Hello, welcome to another episode of Believing the Real. And this time, episode 9, after we have completed Jonathan Haidt's The Righteous Mind, having gone over it and seeing how human evolutionary progress ultimately leads to a conversion of the biological into the mindful, from the evolutionary developments that had occurred up until then in evolutionary history, to the point where humanity subsumes everything, the entire biological, within, as it were, the ideological. In the mind, everything becomes part of the human mind, and not the single individual mind, but rather the single individual mind is subsumed within the how shall we phrase it, the inter-subjective space, the place of others, the mind of others. We are born into a world where we assimilate the mind of others into our own, and thus become us, become more human, realize our human potential through assimilating, imbibing, as it were, the world of others. And this world of others is our world, the language that we speak, the ideas that we have, the infrastructure of our souls, of our psychology, of our perspective on life, the way that we organize ourselves within the real. This all begins and ends with the mind of others, with the intersubjective space, the ideas, the ideals, the thoughts of human groups. So in fact, we can see that this is an innovation, a leap forward, comparable to the appearance of multicellular creatures, because human societies are multicellular humans. A human being is forever embedded within his or her social context, and the rise of the individual, the rise of our current visions of how each person is an important and valuable thing unto himself, floats on this sea of groupishness, this evolutionary sea of our tendency to subsume ourselves in the greater group. And in fact, we see that the whole struggle of modernity, and of course what people call late modernity, and I call the age of doubt, or our current age, or whatever, what we need, our present times, which is also modernity. It's like modernity coming into its own, as it were. All this has developed in the past few hundred years, but it's floating within a sea of tradition, within a sea of groupishness that we saw from Haidt, is full of tendencies that pull us into the group, that subsume the individual within the group mind. So in fact, we are products of this group mind. We are embedded in this group mind. So the question is, how is it that individuality did arise and is arising in greater and greater measure as time passes? And how do we, how can we balance between our tendencies to be grouped together, which have, as we saw, various negative aspects, especially in the great experiments of the 20th century. We saw how the attempt to change our history as a group has led to some very nasty pieces of work, like Nazi Germany or Stalinist Russia, which were great social experiments in trying to reconfigure the human vista, the human horizon, and they failed hopelessly because they became totalitarian. They became they erased the rights of the individual. They erased the individuals. They just murdered them, off with them. Anything that would remove from what the group vision was. So we saw that these colossal failed experiments in making humanity a better person, as it were, a better great person, have shown us that groupishness can be very, very destructive. And we know this from traditions. There's so much literature, there's so much everything so much of what literature has been doing, psychology has been doing, is this contention of the individual with these groupish tendencies. And now, only in our generation, we see that it is slowly being unwound, that slowly the screws of groupishness are being loosened around the individuals so that each individual can find his or her place in the world. But the question is, how is this constructed? And this is what we're going to be dealing with in the next, in subsequent talks. How exactly is our relationship with the group mind constructed within modernity? So we will be looking at science, we will be looking at interactions between people through language, through economic exchanges, the rule of law, everything that we have in our world that constructs our world through this inter-subjectivity. Our world as individuals is embedded within the greater world of humanity. So, in fact, what we are trying to look at are the degrees of freedom here and the way that we can organize ourselves so that we won't suffer the consequences of groupishness while we will enjoy the fruits of it. Because obviously, most of the great achievements of humanity, past and present, are as a group. When we construct great institutions, academic institutions, scientific institutions, technological institutions, medical, and so on, it is as a group, people working together to generate new advances, to organize themselves within reality in a better way. And so much of it has happened only in retrospect. We look back, we say, oh, this was good, this was bad. So little of it that was good was proactive. Usually when people start making a better world proactively, then they become quite destructive. And I always like to quote the Cultural Revolution in China, the greatest attempt at uprooting tradition and reinstating a new vision, what they called uprooting the four olds, the traditions, the authority, all the old things, all that we would look at with trepidation, with let's say Michel Foucault or with Freud even, about the civilization that overpowers, the traditions that bind. All this was ripped off and make way for the new generation and so on. And it was horribly destructive. So why was it destructive? How was it destructive? And how are the true processes, the gentle processes, or the gentler perhaps, or maybe the more insidious processes that have been shown to create a better world, how have these worked? So all these questions revolve around the idea of how human beings interact within the greater ambience of other human beings. So let's begin by a meta-analysis and then go into our first observation will be of the rise of science and how science conducts itself. And then we will move on to economic, legal, and so on aspects of this. But first, let me show you, prepared a new slide for us that more or less creates an orientation for our discussion. So here we are. I'll explain this, these basic ideas here that will guide us in our progression here. So it may be, look, there's a lot of text here at first, but let's go over it. So I'm starting from actually the right. Actually, it's the left when you're looking at it. It's like, okay, it's the right when you're facing it. Let's not go into this. Okay, so trust is the mediator. So between the real, this is the way that we meet reality. Between the real and the ideal, let me move aside for a moment. Yeah, the ideal, conjectures at the bottom. Between the real and the ideal, this is the slide that you've already seen from our previous discussion of the ideal and the real, from conjecture to refutations, what people think about and the actual reality that we inhabit as individuals, which can refute or corroborate for us the ideals that we imbibe from the outside. So if we go back to this slide, this sort of describes the workings of how we move from the ideal to the real, or actually how the real, as we encounter it as individuals, how is it embedded within the ideal? So it's all mediated by trust. Trust in others is what mediates for us the dogmas, the doctrines, the theories, the ideals, the visions, whatever, of the society that we are embedded in as individuals. So how are we connected to this? Via trust. We believe in. So, and this is basic. This is the basic human mechanism, the basic human process for being embedded in inter-subjectivity, in the world of other human beings. Through our minds, our mind brings in all these outside influences, outside descriptions that we get from other people at the most basic level. This is the way that we evolved, as we saw what Haidt brought from Tomasello and so on, about the way that we are embedded in the representation of other minds, which is in fact the way that we are enmeshed in the minds of others. And this enmeshment goes through trust. It begins with the trust of a child as he or she grow up, and they bring the language into their minds, and the mind becomes the group mind as it assimilates the group language. As we know, the main distinction between groups is their different languages. So if you speak English, you are speaking a language that a lot of people have as a second language. In fact, these talks are part of the reason that they are in English is because most people in the world, whatever first language they speak, whatever mother tongue they speak, they also speak English. Quite a lot also speak English as a mother tongue, but that's a different thing. The thing is that as we acquire language, our mother tongue, whatever it is, we in fact bring in the whole vision of reality that is produced by others. This is our interface with others is through language as at first. But of course, language bears ideas. Language is not just an empty currency. It is full of the values, the various values of words, the various values of constructions, and is also very creative, as each person uses language for his and her own aspirations, thoughts, desires to express oneself in one's language so others can understand. And it's always very creative. It's always original. In fact, we find it difficult when a lot of people, well, it's not really difficult. A lot of people talk we have cliches. A lot of our language is cliches, but what is a cliche? Each word is a cliche because every word that we repeat that others understand has already been spoken and understood by others. So it's really nothing in language is individual. There is no individual language, and our very humanity, because without language, we are very poor humans. What makes us humans is our linguistic ability, our ability to conceive, to represent in our mind the world and others. So through this medium, we bind with our society and we learn to become part of. We learn to become a functioning part of the greater whole of our society through language, which is, of course, mediated by trust. Because if one's mother or father says to us when we are very young, look, this is a dog, and we perceive that this four-legged creature that we are seeing here is a dog, and we believe our parents that this is the dog. And of course, if it would be a French parent, it would be like chien or hund or kelev or kuche. Each language has its own idea, own symbolization, representation of this four-legged creature. But when our parent tells us for the first time the name of this creature, then we perceive it as God's own truth. This is for us the reality, the representation of reality, which becomes synonymous with this idea of dog. And this is completely full of trust. We trust that this is indeed what this creature is. It's a dog. And of course, this becomes refined as we become more, as we grow into our civilization. And the next creature, four-legged creature, we say and point to and cry out, dog, dog. And our parent corrects us, no, that's a horse. So wait, what's the difference between a horse and a dog? So slowly our representations become more refined. Ultimately, we will get to a point that we will study evolution and we'll see how all dogs and horses emerge from some primordial four-legged creature that crawled out of the primordial mud, some amphibian, ancient amphibian, and so on. So our ideas of dog become refined. But all of this is trust. How do we know the difference between dog and horse? Because a parent told us, a teacher told us, a peer told us. We learn from others about our world. So, and this language thing, this is something that we take on trust. It's not something that we invent for ourselves. Later, at some other stage, once we have fully assimilated our humanity through language and through other aspects of civilization, then we are free to think up our own language if we want, like Esperanto. If we can convince others to speak it with us, then we will have a new civilization. But it didn't catch on so well. It's still, I think, as far as I know, a language of adults who like to play around with language. and it hasn't become a natural language. Although this isn't really something that is important, because as we will see, we have a future talk just dedicated to language. The adult languages have been much maligned, have been much maligned in academia because they are difficult, they are not natural phenomena. So they are more like constructed human phenomena. And because of this, the great lingua francas of the world are considered to be dead languages, because you can't study their natural development, so you put them aside and you call them dead. But they are absolutely not dead. Computer language, as computer buffs love to say, coding is poetry. Why is it poetry? Because they learn a new language that allows them to reconstruct or to create new worlds. And this language is completely viable. It's a great language, but it's not a natural language. It's a language of adults in their interaction with reality, actually in their interaction with their own representations of reality that they manipulate through a new language and so on. Coding is really poetry, just in conception. But in any case, all this is mediated by trust. Others discover things, others say things, and we take this on trust. So if we look, again, we are looking at this side. Trust is the mediation between the real and the ideal. What we experience as humans within the real is mediated by our trust in the ideal, by our trust in the ideas of others. So this is mediated, this is another level, by trust in majority opinions about the ideal. It's not just trust. Originally, we trust our parents, our guides, our mentors, whatever. But ultimately, we live in a world of consensus, of majorities. If most of the people around us believe something, most of the people around us speak a certain language, most of the people around us hold certain ideals, hold certain thoughts to be valid, certain ideas to be valid, then we trust that. We have a trust in majority opinions. And we will see the implications of this. This is far-reaching, but just as a starter, if we remember the great experiments conducted by Ash, he put people in a room, all of them were collaborators, and just one person was the subject, the one undergoing the experiment. So this is like more or less a parable of the individual in the world. He's put in a room with others, and now he faces reality, and what will he do with that reality? So Ash showed people something like lines, and one line was very short, one line was very long. It was really obvious, and if nobody told you anything, you'd say this one is short, this one is long, and that's it. But now Ash told all the collaborators to say that the lines are equal, or perhaps they said the short one was longer than the long one, something really not borne out by reality. And he wanted to see what the poor guy or the poor woman who was pulled into this group of collaborators, of liars, what they will do with this. And many people changed, or it depended. If they heard first the views of the many, then they sort of changed they said, okay, yeah, it's not what I see, it's what the group says. Although all of them were aware that, yeah, the group, that they saw something different. But, and Ash tested them afterwards. He interviewed them and he asked, okay, why did you see that? They said, yeah, I saw it, but I thought maybe I was in error. Maybe because if everybody sees something different, then maybe I woke up on the wrong side of the bed. Or others said, no, yeah, I knew that it was different, but whatever. Why should I go against the group now? If everybody says like this, okay, I'll go along, and so on. Some of them, of course, I think it was 30% or 40%, retained, said, no, this is not, I don't know what you people are up to, but it's different. I can see that this is short and long. Now, this is a very clear situation that reality was different than what other people said. Now, take other social situations and most situations about reality that we have no idea about what the real is, except what other people tell us. We have no way of finding out. As we will see later on, the whole edifice of science is built on abstruse knowledge that nobody can check for oneself. It's all taken on trust now. And so what will the individual do when everybody says it's night now, even though the sun is shining? So will we say, okay, it's night now? Or will we stick with our own individual opinion and so on? Of course, I took this parable of night or not night from religion, where there are many, for example, in Chabad, also we have it in other streams. I know about this. Yeah, in Judaism, we have a lot of this. If the rabbi says it's night now, even though you say the sun is shining, no, it's really night. It's all illusion and so on. Or maybe the infallibility of the Pope. We have it in Catholicism. So there's a lot of this in trusting in authority over one's senses. But even that authority, it's not the rabbi. It's that all the people around us say that what the rabbi says is the truth, the holy truth, or whatever, or what the Pope says. So, in fact, it is again the majority opinion about the source of truth that constructs truth for the individual. So, whatever we meet in reality is mediated by the majority opinions surrounding us. And this is, of course, conducive to all kinds of problems that we saw in previous talks when we saw about the righteous mind. We want our group to be right. We support a group. We have a confirmation bias. What our group says is true. What is believed by the many is certainly truer than what one single individual thinks that he knows some newfangled truth. This is the way that we define madness. One person says that he is seeing something that nobody else sees, so we completely disregard that person's opinion and so on. So in fact, everything is mediated by majority opinions. And the question will be now in modernity how that majority opinion is constructed. Because as we just mentioned, it could be a majority opinion that says that everything in Scripture is absolutely, literally true. And it could be a majority opinion that says, no, Darwin exposed a different Genesis story, a different story of origins that we now hold to be true. But it's the we, it's the many who have adopted this view who construct our world of trust. So today, of course, this is the classic creationism versus evolutionism. Whom do we trust? What is the majority opinion that we agree with? And it has a lot to do with where we are born. If you are born in a place which has, where the civilization has rejected religion as literal truth, then you will grow up within a Darwinian world, and that will be your main vision of reality. And then when you see other visions, you meet creationist ideas, they will seem to you weird. And, that's the opinion, their opinion. So you will have to be very magnanimous. You will have to expand your horizons to accept other visions and views, or you will say, okay, that's their vision. You will make it something very small and subjective. It will not be the trust that you are embedded in. And this is another thing about trust, that the trust that we agree with, as it were, that we take in without introspection as the description of our world, this is a trust that we find very hard to go against, to refute, to think ill of. And even if we open ourselves to other civilizations and we look at the way they perceive the world, it's still within the spectacles of our own civilization that we approach them. So that if we are within modernity, then we may approach them with an open mind, saying, let's see what's going on there. But we will still judge truth and justice and so on from our own civilization. For example, if you come from a modernist civilization or late modernity, then you will look at traditional societies and you will look at the place of gender and you will say, do they oppress women? Do they allow a full human expression to everyone? Is there discrimination in that society, and so on? While if you come from a more traditional society, you will ask other questions. You will say, is this society normal? Are they behaving like human beings? And so on, which Haidt illuminated so well for us. So all this is mediated by our trust in what the majority of our group believes about the world, and we trust it. So, in fact, everything is mediated by trust, in trust in what others believe. And as I wrote here, idols are crushed, kings are dethroned, markets are shattered by the distrust of the many. So when a nation disbelieves its sovereigns, as in the French Revolution, it overthrows them. We no longer believe that you are our king. We no longer hold you dear. So the many overturn the kings. The many who turned away from religion eventually crushed the idols, or rather, even we can say, the many who turned to monotheistic religions crushed the previous idols. As, for example, Christianity undercut the Roman belief in idolatry. Islam has taken a lot from Hinduism and other religions in the East and so on. So we see that when trust moves to another worldview, to another ideal, then previous edifices of trust are decimated. And we will see this also in the economic sense. When trust in the market goes down, then the market crashes. And we have some very interesting data on this from 2008, how the market almost crushed through distrust and then was saved by trust, actually, by flooding the market with what the banks called liquidity, i.e., trust us, we'll cover whatever debt you have, we will not be insolvent, and so on. So we will go into that as well, but it's all manifestations of our trust in the visions of the many. Revolutions are not carried out by single people, nor are traditions maintained by single people. So it doesn't matter if you're a revolutionary or a reactionary or just living your life out. Whatever you do, it's always within the environs of what other people think about the world. Other people, what your majority opinion is, what the majority of people in your civilization consider to be the real, that is the context of the real that you will live in. So if trust is everything, it's the way that we humans interact with others and the way that replaced the more stringent, or shall we say less flexible biological basis of interaction between individual creatures. We humans interact within the mind of other humans, within a common mind, a mutually held mind, as it were. And this allows us a lot of freedom as individuals, and yet allows us to collaborate with others in an unprecedented scale. Human societies are truly capable of acting together as one whole, one person, as it were, single mind. And we have seen this throughout history, and we have seen it especially when national bonds are wedded with religious bonds, and we have seen it, like for example, in Java. Geertz describes the great theater states of Java, where everyone identified with the core, the kings, and of course they died with them. They all committed suicide in face of the, I think it was the Dutch who conquered there, and they all went straight into the Dutch muskets following their kings, and they all died. So we see that the group acted together. We have it in Judaism. I always bring a lot of examples from Judaism because that's my home turf, as it were, where people acted together, where they stood as one man, one person before God, the entire nation, as it were. And we see this, in fact, in every war where people go for war for their country. They act as one person against the other country. So nations against nations, it's like one big person against another big person, even though every nation is made up of individuals. So the secret of all this is, in fact, trust. The trust that we share in our perspective, our worldview that we believe in along with others, and we believe the majority opinion. So now the other question arises, and that's the main story, the main narrative that we are going to analyze in this talk and in future, the next few talks, the rise of science. Because as we know, science has a very different vision about what to trust. Science, in fact, is deeply involved with the idea of doubt, and in fact goes against dogmatic traditions. And then the question arises, if we are so deeply embedded by nature in dogma, if we believe in what the majority of our society believes, if dogma is the evolutionary way to go for us as humans, how did science arise? How is it possible that a whole vision that in fact is based on conjecture, as we see refutations and conjectures that we take from Popper, the whole edifice of science says, okay, this is not God's own truth. This is a temporary truth that is the best generalization that we have now about reality, but it is a conjecture, and it may be refuted as further data come in. So science is like from the outset saying what you trust is tentative. How can that be when our tendency is for dogma? How did we accept doubt rather than certainty as the foundation of all knowledge? And yet we continue to produce new dogma all the time. The great dogmas of modern civilization. So, and also of science. There's a lot of dogma in science. As we said time and again, there's a confirmation bias. We want our theories, our conjectures to be right. We are not looking for refutations at all. It's only when the real refutes us, when we get this slap in the face from reality, that we wake up and say, hey, maybe we were wrong in our thought. Okay, let's change. Let's make a shift. But ultimately, there was a shift. And this is the shift that is at the basis of what we are saying here about believing the real. The shift from accepting the dogma of traditions, the dogmas of authority, of what we receive from our betters and elders, from charisma even, what we believe to be holy, we believe to be revealed and so on, to a dogma that is based on the shifting sands of conjectures. But those shifting sands are more aligned with the other end of our spectrum, the spectrum that begins from the ideal and ends with the real. It's more aligned with the real. It's saying, okay, we have our dogmas and we believe them, but we let our encounter with reality alter our visions. So if we all see that the sun is shining, then the rabbi or the pope can say that it is now nighttime, but we will refuse to accept that person's opinion, because we now accept an opinion that is held by specialist others. In a way, the rise of science is like the rise of a gang of popes, or a group within a group. The rise of the specialists, the rise of certain people that we hold to be knowledgeable about certain aspects of reality, and we believe them as a group. It's like a tribunal. It's like we have like 72 judges, and we believe those judges because this is an opinion held by people that we trust, and as a group we trust them, and they are a group within a group that is trusted. For within their specialty, again, there is a majority opinion. So this is the true innovation of science, and we will see how this developed. We will look at Shapin's works on the rise of science later on. This transpired that instead of accepting our group opinion about authority, about charismatic leadership, about revelation, about religion, and so on, in toto, as it were, we now have groups within groups. We have specializations of trust within the more general trust. For example, let us take the idea of chemistry. So chemists have very specialized knowledge, and every advance in chemistry is in fact created or generated within the boundaries of the group of chemists, which today are a group of people who have specialized for many years in this discipline. They know a lot about the way their compounds interact, and they work in various environments throughout the world, but they are connected in that specific area throughout the world, despite or notwithstanding whatever else they may be affiliated with. They may be of different religions, they may be Christian or Muslim or Jewish or Hindu or Buddhist, and still they are specializing in chemistry. They may have different nationalities, they may be Chinese or Canadian or Israeli or Bulgarian, and still they are specializing in chemistry. So within their societies, within their languages, they speak a different language, a different realm of trust that is removed from the parochial, from the local, and is international in its scale and is pan-human in its connections, but it is still based on the same basic human abilities and tendencies. The trust, the ability to trust, the ability to assimilate through trust, through our belief in what others our belief in what others believe, through our ability to introvert, to take into our own minds the minds of others, that we become more knowledgeable about reality, that we construct our doctrines, dogmas, ideas, theories, whatever, conjectures about reality. But this has become a specialized trust group that is like a mind within the mind of humanity. And it's a cross-cultural, cross-civilizational regime of the mind, a regime of trust. And this regime of trust within the scientific endeavor, and maybe within the greater endeavor of academia in general, we'll go into academia and its various shadings at a later talk. But this group within a group, this depository of trust within the greater trust of humanity, becomes a sort of group authority that the majority of humanity looks up to. Because everywhere, in every nation, in every religion, we find that men and women of science, those who, for example, we're taking an example of chemistry, there are people studying chemistry everywhere in the world, in every civilization, and they become part of that group, of that civilization of chemists. And how is science conducted there? We will see at a later date, in a future talk, we'll go specifically and at greater length into Latour's famous, Latour and Woolgar actually, famous book, Laboratory Life, that describes the way that science is actually carried out in a biological laboratory. They're really engrossing stuff. It's amazing the way that things are actually carried out in real life, as it were. But the group of people studying chemistry and doing chemistry in laboratories all over the world, they also have the same human structure of believing the many, of believing the majority opinion. And every scientist, as he or she works within their discipline, they are all the time relying on the visions of the majority opinion within their discipline. And when they produce their own work, it is judged by the many. It is judged in peer review, the dreaded peer review, that everything you publish, everything you write is immediately scrutinized by others in your profession, in your discipline. And they can make and break you because they will say, this is right, it coincides with what we already know. Yes, this is an innovation. Or they will say, no, this is just an artifact. You're just making it up. You have, check your instruments. Your instruments are wrong. You haven't calibrated properly. You have impurities in your mix. That can't be. That goes against the grain of what we already know. But what do we already know? We know what we trust in the opinion of the majority of scientists specializing in this area. And this is becoming more and more specialized, because if before all chemists were a bunch happily doing electrolysis or whatever and playing around with compounds and making up theories, now we are in a place where they do the same stuff but in a very, very specific areas. So we have organic chemistry and inorganic, and within organic we have this kind of substance, we have proteins, or we have acids. I'm not enough of a chemist even to know the specializations within this specialization. But obviously today, saying someone is a chemist is not saying anything. It's just like he has a first degree, or maybe he's a graduate in chemistry. He knows 3 or 5 years of knowledge, which is just the beginning of specialization. And only after 10 or 20 years, one can say of this person that he's well versed in the art that he has taken up. So, in fact, we have specialization and specialization within specialization. But in each subgroup, it's all about trust. We trust in the knowledge of others in our specialization, and we have enough knowledge to adjudge what veers from that dogma that we accept now, since most of us in this discipline agree about this or that piece of scientific knowledge, and we accept that knowledge as true. Again, confirmation bias, Popper notwithstanding, we are not looking for refutations, but we do refute that group of trust that confirms to itself its own knowledge about chemistry. This confirms and refutes knowledge that goes against the present knowledge. So all the time, within scientific disciplines, the real provides us with new information that can either refute or tally with. It can not confirm, but coincide with what we already know, and for us that's confirmation. But the trust we place in our knowledge is the trust of the majority. Now, let's go back a bit. People standing outside the discipline have no idea what the chemist tells us about, I don't know, the folding of proteins. That's not a chemist, I think it's biology even, or molecular biology. It's a special discipline now. But what the scientist, this chemist, tells us about proteins, we have no way of knowing. We have no idea about proteins because we don't have the specialized knowledge. So we trust. Who do we trust? We trust this chemist, but not as an individual. But as a part of this group, we trust a majority opinion that has an opinion about what proteins behave like. But we take this for us. These chemists are more or less like the Pope, like the rabbi. They are infallible. They give us God's own word as it is mediated by science. We have no way of getting beyond and understanding what they are on about, unless we also study chemistry. But if we study chemistry, then we have no idea about, I don't know, economics or physics or whatever other human area of endeavor that takes a lifetime. So actually, we have all these human lifetimes dedicated to specific areas of knowledge, of endeavor. Not just knowledge, it's also art, also the practice of things, the know-how. Not just knowledge, but know-how, how to do things in so many areas, in all walks of human life. This chemistry thing is just an example, but an engineer with 20 years of experience in the manufacture of, I don't know, Allen screws or whatever, I can't think of anything, lasers, whatever. Of course, his expertise is beyond our knowledge, and we take it on trust. But our trust is now based on groups of majority opinions of specialists. So we have in fact shifted from a universal trust in what our society tells us, which has all the accoutrements of evolution that we saw in what Haidt describes, or what Weber describes, the belief in the authority, in charisma and so on, the leader, the group of elders, what we receive from our elders. In fact, these are focus groups of democratic tribes that are focused on one issue, on one area, and together they reach a consensus, a majority opinion, and that majority opinion becomes the dogma accepted by all those outside that group. And this becomes the institution of academia, of science, of knowledge, of technology, whatever institution, whatever human group, and there are so many varieties, we'll get into it, and the way that these organizations function in a future talk. But all of this becomes the accepted dogma of the layman. All of us who are not specialists in all these areas, and there are so many areas that we do not specialize in fact, if anything, the Renaissance man has become something of an impossibility in our era, because true knowledge in each area is impossible for an individual, because it's so deep. You have to spend a whole lifetime, 20 years, to get that knowledge in chemistry that would allow you to innovate and do things within the industry. So no layman can do that. So you dedicate your life to your area of knowledge, and all the rest you take on trust. It's the same old way that we always functioned as humans. We take it on trust. We believe. We believe, but now we believe in the real. But what kind of real? We always believed in the real. But who told us what the real was? Now we believe in what science tells us is real, what these focus groups tell us is real, because there has been a shifting point about what to take on trust. And we no longer take on trust things that are not based on majority opinions of people working on the real side, the refutation side of the spectrum. But on the other hand, this is much stronger than religion ever was. Because religion, whatever religion you held, always had these interfaces that it didn't exactly bind with reality. That you had to sort of, like in the Ash group that I mentioned, you had to sort of suppress your opinion in order to accept the opinion of your betters, elders, authority figures, hallowed people, or whatever. So, in this sense, science is even more dogmatic, more convincing, more persuasive than even religion. Because now we don't just take it on trust, but the trust that we take things on is based on the very core of the very mechanism of trust, which is based on our acceptance of majority opinions of people that we hold to be authorities. And science has the greatest authority possible, because how can you compare someone who has an opinion based on whatever, who has not studied, for example, chemistry for 20 years and knows his stuff, with the opinion of somebody who does? So actually, our trust in what science produces is much stronger than we ever believed in our, in the Pope. Or because competing religion and so on in science, there's not even competing religions. Because the religion, the knowledge, say, of chemistry is shared by worldwide, by all people of all religions, of all nations, of whatever gender. They all believe that, water is made up of 2 hydrogens and an oxygen molecule, atom. It's the water molecule is made up of these atoms. Wow. Complete faith, complete trust, complete belief in that dogma, crossing all other religions. So science, this innovation in trust, has become the very focal point of our belief. And it is all the time evolving, yet completely stable vis-a-vis the rest of humanity. So the edge of doubt, and as we say that we live in an age of doubt, the leading edge of doubt in many areas is confined to very specific things in very specialized laboratories. We will see this when we go into laboratory life by Latour and Woolgar. We will see that the questions that scientists ask, is this substance the enzyme X or is it not? Is it perhaps just an artifact of my instrumentation or some impurities in the mix? Or is this a real substance that I am now seeing from the first time that is actually differentiated from other substances, and this is a new enzyme that I have discovered here that's in this mix. So it's very specific questions, only capable of being answered by very great specialists. And while we as laymen have no such doubts, whatever these scientists, whatever conclusions they reached, by consensus, by a majority acceptance of their own peers, is for us dogma. We accept this on faith, absolutely. I am not going to argue with the people of the Salk Institute who discovered those enzymes that Latour describes in his book Laboratory Life. Absolutely not, because I don't know. I have no basis for arguing with them, and I hold them in trust because that is the institution of science. It is trusted worldwide by all nations, by all religions, wherever you are, wherever you go. Of course, this is open to abuse, and we'll have another talk about charlatans, lying, the abuse of trust, pseudoscience, scientism of various degrees, so there's a lot to say about that, because the abuses of trust are no less important for humans as the trust itself, because we all the time we are thinking, is this to be trusted or not? And also, where are we in this? Now that we are embedded in trust, how is our own behavior reflective of that trust, or part of this mesh that we are embedded in, the mesh of science, the mesh of trust? So actually, what we are now going to discuss is that new belief, the rise of science, the dislocation of belief from the general layman belief. We all believe in scripture, we all believe in the Pope, we all believe in our rabbis, or whatever religion or whatever society you are in, you are embedded in, to a new vista of trust that is created by a new interface with reality, with specialists that actually specialize in looking closely at what appears before our eyes. The rise of empiricism, the rise of, logic was always there, and it could take us wherever we want, as we will see a lot of that in future talks. But basically, the whole discipline of science, how did it arise? How did it become the focus of human belief? How is it that this institution, completely modern, something completely innovative, took all those bases that we saw in human evolution and brought it to a new level, opened a new vista of evolution that we are in the midst of? We are now what people call late modernity, liquid modernity, whatever. I'll just call it modernity because it's still the same thing that began with the scientific revolution. We began with the rise of science, and is now accelerating exponentially all the time, and we are embedded in this. This is a new world, a new vision that differs from all the worlds that we knew before, in that it gives us as humans a whole lot of more power as individuals, while at the same time it embeds us in a regime of trust that is a lot more, I wouldn't say coercive, but powerful. The trust that we place in that group of science and of scientists, say the chemists, and the helplessness, the depths of ignorance, the structured ignorance, the way that we cannot break through, because you cannot, even if you spend your whole lifetime, you will never be able to assimilate all of it. You will always have to take most of science on trust. Even if you decry this and you say, no, okay, I'm going to specialize in chemistry. I will not take on trust anything. I'm going back like the first scientists who said no more taking on trust anything. We are going to be complete empiricists, and only what we see, that is what we will believe. That's gone. You can spend your whole life and you will be special. You can be a specialist in chemistry, but you will never know what the physicist in the other room knows. You will never know it. Because you won't be. You don't have the time. You can't. Each of our individual lives specialize in one aspect of reality. But when we join others and we create a regime of trust, and we take on trust the conclusions of other groups of people working within that same framework, and this is worldwide. As I said, it crosses all, not religion, nation, gender. This is really John Lennon's dream come true. Imagine all the people who had imagine there's no country and no religion too. There is a place where there is no country and no religion too. And it doesn't contradict country or religion. It's the world of academia, of science, which cuts across all boundaries. We don't care who you are. We don't care what other things you believe. If you're a specialist in our area, and we as other specialists, we see that you know your stuff, then okay, let's work together, and our mutual belief, our mutual trust creates that belief for society in general. And all of humanity, wherever it is, can take that mutual trust and take it as its own, even though it is held as dogma, because nobody's going to argue with the chemist when he gives you that, I don't know, the drug against your splitting headache or whatever. Okay, so that concludes our introduction to the world of science as trust embedded in majority opinions, in specialized majority opinions. And in our next talk, we will start reviewing some of the work done by Shapin, who focused on trust as the basis, indeed, of doing science. And of course, all this is in the framework, our theological framework, of progress and perfection. We see that the progression here is within the area, the realm of mind, as embedded in the group think, in the group ideas and beliefs of specialized groups, actually allows us as humanity in general to slowly make a greater progress within reality, achieve greater health, productivity, liberation, expression, and in general, the pursuit of happiness.